Welcome back to the One Shot Show, where GMs go to level up. No zingers, no bangers. We are on a tight schedule because today we're talking about yes and. My name is Matt.
My name is Mock.
And I hate yes and.
What is yes and, Matt?
So, all right, there's two things that I want to lay out here before we get started. The first is what yes and is supposed to be, like the core premise of what it is, and what problem I think GMs are actually facing when they get given the, I think, wrong-headed advice to yes and more. So, yes and.
Nothing but hot takes this episode.
And this is, you're just going to have to roll with me here because this is going to take a couple of minutes. I've got this run down to a couple of minutes, and that's what it's going to be. So, yes and at its heart comes from improvisational theater. Not necessarily improvisational comedy, but improvisational theater.
Yep.
I'll give an example, right?
I'll jump in on this. You give me something, I'll yes and it.
Like, let's say you and I are, we're doing an improv scene, and you go, Matt, we need to get these donuts finished so that we can ship them out before the boss gets back. And
Matt,
then I say something.
I need to get these donuts finished so we can ship them out.
And I would say, if I'm yes-anding, then I would say something back that first affirms what you've said, and then adds something to it. The yes and the and, right? I might say, and we got to get that elephant out of the driveway before the dispatch can go.
Because then the donut delivery truck won't be able to reach the donut factory.
Exactly. So now we've built on the scene, right? We're going somewhere. The purpose of yes and in this circumstance is to maintain the narrative momentum of the scene. That's the function that it serves. Now, if I were to fail to yes and you came in and you went,
Matt, the donut machine is broken. The room is filling full of smoke and we will all asphyxiate within minutes.
And I said something like, oh no, I fixed that 15 minutes ago. Help me get this elephant out of the driveway. I have failed to yes and you because I have not affirmed your idea. Now, I may have still given us something else to do in the scene, but I have failed to affirm your idea. I have halted the narrative momentum and supplanted it with something else. Now, one of the reasons that's a big no-no in improvisational theater is because everyone is an equal, right? Everyone's an equal. If I were to do that to you, I'm essentially poo-pooing your idea, usurping it with my own, and saying, no, what I want to do is better. That's very inappropriate in the world of improvisational theater, and no one's going to want to work with you ever again. The reason I think this is fundamentally inappropriate as a structure for D&D is because D&D is not... you are not equals, right? In TTRPGs in general, we actually talked about this. We've talked about this before. The GM serves a very different function to what the players do in terms of the collaborative story. I am of the opinion that the GM's role within that collaborative story is, for the most part, is to define limits and provide outcomes to inputs. That is very different to two people who are on equal footing, who can equally move the story forward in whatever direction.
You've done something really beautiful there, which is offer an extremely concise definition of a GM's role in basically any TTRPG. And also, you raise a really interesting point about the GM is always God. It is your world. You determine what there is for the players to interact with. And I have introduced well over maybe 200 to 300 people to RPGs. And sometimes I do get brand new players who will see what I'm doing as I'm offering prompts based on people's characters or the backstories I've just invented and making things up. And they'll try to jump on that bandwagon. And immediately, often the other players will turn to them and say, I'm sorry, that's not how that works. They will know them. They will, what did you say? Poo-poo their idea.
Yeah. So the thing that I actually want to get at the heart of here is often when I see people giving the advice of yes and, they're basically saying you should affirm the player's ideas and then try and incorporate them and move forward, right? You should yes them and you should and them. The reason I think that's being given out wrongly is often the problem that these GMs are presenting when they're asking for this advice is the player is delivering them something that they haven't accounted for. And I think this is something that happens to a lot of start-out GMs. I'll give an example. I'll paint you a picture of a scene, right? You've built this combat. You've got this really cool set piece. And the players are figuring out how they want to approach it. And you mentioned that the room that all the monsters they're about to fight are in has a bunch of stone pillars. And what you've got prepared is this combat, and you're thinking the pillars are going to be really cool for cover and make it more dynamic. And then a player goes, "Can I sneak into the room and rig explosives around the pillars, blow them up, and bring the room down?" And if you are new to GMing and you haven't accounted for that, and you don't yet have the acumen to improvise limits and deliver outcomes to those inputs, you're probably going to go no, because you're not sure what to do. Now, if you go to someone for advice and you're like, hey, here's a problem that I've had, they're going to say, oh, you should yes and. You should agree with the idea and, affirm it and then move forward with that. I think that's not quite what's going on. It's almost right, but it's not quite what's going on, because what that GM is actually lacking is a confidence and a system fluency to build a new course of action to deliver the outcomes to the inputs.
Okay, so what you're saying is there is actually space for yes-anding if, as a game master, depending on whatever system you're running, if you are extremely fluent and knowledgeable and you know you can deliver something, then yes-anding becomes more and more okay. Are there situations where yes-and is good?
Okay, the situations where it's good are narrative ones, because the heart of what I'm getting at here is yes and is a narrative tool, and when it's being given out as advice in these situations, I think it's being wrongly given because you're trying to use a narrative solution to a mechanical problem.
Ooh, there we go.
And the mechanical problem is stemming from that GM's understanding of the rules. And this is particularly chronic, I would say, in D&D 5th edition, because it has so few rules for actually resolving things. The level of system fluency you need to correctly deal with that situation as a GM is very, very high compared to a lot of other both rules-heavy and rules-light systems. And that's where yes and seems like this great calamine lotion, but it is a Band-Aid over a deep wound.
So I think a really good example here, that'll kind of sum up what you're saying, is you want to apply yes and to story decisions and character decisions, but not particularly mechanical decisions, such as if I was playing an elven fighter and I'm defending a wall on a siege, and I say to the GM, I would like to use my shield as a surfboard and go down these stairs while shooting these orcs. The GM might say, no, that's completely ridiculous, and they will be totally justified in saying that. But if as part of my backstory, I said, I want my character to be in love with a dwarf, the GM might come back and say, well, he's also the scion of a noble house. And then you keep building and yes-anding up off of that to a beautiful narrative.
Yeah, see, now I think all of that was very unrealistic, and I don't think anyone would include that in a story, both literary or filmographically.
I just came up with that.
Yeah, that's an original idea, and it's a bad one. You shouldn't use it again. But what the actual thing is here as well is, in that situation, the GM's inclination to say, no, that's ridiculous. The way to say yes to that is, again, mechanical fluency. It's right. Okay, this is maybe quite a high check here, right? Like if it doesn't fit the tone of things that have otherwise happened in the game, then what you do is you say, okay, yeah, you could do that. This is going to be quite difficult to do. You intimate to the player that it's going to be an acrobatics check, and it's going to be very high, and it might be difficult for them to pass it. Now, they can still go ahead with it, and they might just roll super high, and then they get to do that crazy thing. But again, what that is defining limits and providing outcomes to inputs.
You've just segued into what many say is the opposite to yes and, but I think is actually a compliment, which is no, but. Because what you've offered right there is this check is going to be basically totally impossible, so it's almost never going to happen. But what you can do in a situation like that, when a player wants to achieve something like that, you're like, hey, I really like your spirit. I like your vim. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say no to that, but I'm going to offer some alternative things that I, using my knowledge and skill set of whatever these mechanics are, might actually work. You're welcome to walk down those stairs, shooting at the orcs instead of the surfboard. It's not going to look as cool, but I'm going to help you get to where you want to go, and we're not going to break the game while we're doing it.
I'm going to push back on that in an interesting way.
Hot takes.
So the problem I have with that is you may be saying the word no, and you may be saying the word but what you're doing there isn't actually no but. And this is something that I really want to get into, because again, this is where I think it is inappropriate advice, because the whole yes and structure stems from improvisational theater in similar formats, and it is a useful thing for that format, right? You know how the film is always different to the book? It's because things that work on paper don't always work on a screen, right? We shouldn't be using a tool whole cloth from one medium and transliterating it to another, because often it's not quite appropriate. We're better off coming up with our own suite of tools that might be inspired by this thing here, but are functionally different and are more tailor-made. And the reason I bring that up with no but is there is another suite of tools, which is called yes, but, no, and. And this comes from fiction writing. And this is about, again, maintaining narrative tension. Not narrative momentum, but narrative tension. It's yes, but, no, and. So what you do, let's say we have a circumstance. You come to a river. All right, we need to try and cross this river. The characters in my book need to cross a river, and they attempt to cross the river. We ask the question, do they succeed in crossing the river? And there are two ways you can answer. You could say, yes, but this negative thing happens, because that maintains narrative tension. Crossing the river wasn't the final thing. That's just one thing they're doing on the way to kill the evil guy in the castle. Or you can no and. So those are both about ramping up the tension. The yes, but is yes, but the current was faster than you expected and you've lost all your supplies. No and goes no, and now the river is swarming with crocodiles. If you want a great example of this, Indiana Jones does it all the time and does it really, really well. You constantly see things work, but at what cost? Or you see other people fail, and now, because of their failure, the problem that Indy has to solve is increased than what it had been if he had gone first.
So what you're saying is, take those tools and kind of flip them a little bit, and it's much more useful to say that when you succeed, that causes a brand new problem to arise for the player to solve.
And I think that...
And when you fail, there's something that they have to grasp onto that still pushes the story ahead. No matter if you're succeeding, no matter if you're failing, there's always something else that can happen. Failure is not a full stop, and success doesn't solve everything all the time.
Exactly, and that's why I think that structure is far more useful for tabletop role-playing games, because we talk about tabletop role-playing games as being a collaborative improvisational story, but in terms of how the narrative tension works, it actually behaves far more similarly to a planned, defined story like in a novel or in a movie, which feels unintuitive because you are coming up with it on the fly. But to preserve that narrative tension, if you use that yes, but, no, and structure, what eventually happens is you do reach the point of resolution where they get a yes with no asterisks, no caveats, no negative effects.
Boring.
Do we kill the big bad in the final session of the campaign? Yes. The relief, the payoff for that is incredible.
Oh, I feel satisfied just even hypothetically imagining it. I would consider myself to fully be a supporter of yes, but, no, and. This weird chimeric confluence of narrative and improv and storytelling all into one little big ball.
All right, I'm going to hand you the talking ball now for a bit, because I've definitely had more than my fair share.
You got your little...
I do.
Your rant out?
Great. I feel 10 kilos lighter.
Oh, that is...
I'm not. I'm the same number of kilos as before, much to my dismay. So, look, Mark, we might have to rapid fire this for time purposes, but rapid fire, what is yes and to you? How do you use it? When is it most appropriate? When is it most inappropriate?
To me, yes and is when a player gives me an idea and I will help them expand it. And this is very, very different for a lot of the games that I run compared to experiences that many of our listeners might have, because I run a lot of games for kids. And they will have these huge, wacky ideas. They don't really know what the limits are. And they might say to me, hey, Mark, I really want a talking pet dragon. And in any other game, I'd be like, no, and something else, something else, something else. But in this case, I might say, this is harmless. The kid is not going to know how to use this. And I might say, yes, of course. Oh, and the dragon is a special dragon, and it's got all these, it's a gem dragon, and you'll have to go and explore this very specific area to get there, and then everybody will get on board to it, and I can just build up back and forth with these kids who are very excited to go on this journey, and it does become, we leave those mechanics behind. When you're talking about this not being a good mechanical tool, you are 100% correct. Yep, depending on your audience, you can occasionally break the rules, break out a bit of yes and have a fun storytelling moment. And it does depend on the system you're using. Better
yet, I actually think you've got to another thing about just the core of yes and what it does. I talk about it being used in improvisational theater. There is such a thing as long-form improvisational theater, but it's not as common. And really, the narrative momentum of the scene ends at the scene. There is no long-term consequence. There is no wider stakes. There is no narrative thread that you have to preserve across, an hour and a half long
play. But it's really dangerous in D&D to introduce a massive talking dragon randomly.
Well, what I'm saying is if you're running something short-form, if you're running a one-shot, it's a lot easier to do that. Because at the end of it, you're done. You walk away, right? If I'm running, which I tend to run very long-form campaigns, which is where a lot of my way of doing things comes from, because I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to have something so game-warping happen because I thought it might be cool in the moment that it derails everything that is possible. It breaks the tone, it breaks the experience for other players, and ends up hurting the campaign in the long run. I have to be a little bit more careful, right? But as you say, you're often running, I think, you're running a lot of sort of one-shots, a lot more short-form things, and for a different demographic. So the things that you have at your disposal are different to mine.
Yeah, so your campaigns, part of the appeal and the draw of your campaigns is you'll often be saying no in the service of a wider story. Meanwhile, last week, I had a player come up to me and say, hey, I really love rats. Can I befriend it? They rolled a natural 20, and I said, roll a D100. That's how many pet rats you now have. I want you to name all of them. Kept them busy for 20 minutes.
Great call, great shout. And look, I think we've really got into the big bones of this. And as always, I still think there is more that can be said about this topic. But I think we're starting to lean more into the difference between short form and long form storytelling, and the tools that might be appropriate therein. So I hope, if nothing else, I've given people who want to, like me, run long form campaigns a bit of caution against using yes and whole cloth, because I don't think it's appropriate for that. But there are instances where it is appropriate. Well, that's been the One Shot Show, and we'll see you in the next one. If you like what you just heard, feel free to support us on Patreon. Every little bit helps. Go to patreon.com/OneShotShow.